Afternoon. We're going to give it a couple of more minutes here to allow attendees to log in, and then we will get the presentation started. I do see a few more attendees coming on to the program here. And Rick, do I have you on the line?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Excellent. Excellent. Can you guys hear me? Great.
Matt, I was just looking on this control panel here. It says a maximum of 501 attendees. Is that going to be a problem?
I don't believe it's going to be a problem, although we did have a couple hundred sign up for this, so. Looks as though we're generally up to about 20. Rick, I've got a couple of different times on my clocks here. I've got a computer screen that tells me it's one time, a cell phone that tells me it's another time, and a telephone phone clock that tells me a certain time. But for folks that are just joining us, we're going to give it a couple more moments here to let more attendees sign on to the presentation, and then we'll get started in a few moments. We appreciate your patience.
Sounds like you have too many clocks.
I do. There's a clock for everything.
Isn't it amazing if you have enough clocks and you just simply don't know what time it is anymore?
It's like setting 3 different alarms to wake up in the morning.
That's right.
Again, for those who are joining us, we are just giving attendees a few more moments to sign in. We'll get started in just a few minutes here. Yeah, a couple more attendees signing in. We'll be getting the presentation and webinar started in a few moments. What time did your 3 clock say it is, Rick?
I only have one, and it says 2 o'clock. It's my computer clock.
2 o'clock. Okay.
It
does look like we've got a couple more folks coming on board here right now. Is the sun shining where you are, Rick?
Well, it is Florida, and yeah, it's shining. I got a blue sky. The water looks calm. That's a good thing, and and it's cold though. It's like 60 or something.
Oh boy, yeah. It was. We're in New Hampshire, as you may know, and it was very, very chilly here the last couple of days. Fortunately, this last snowstorm just barely clipped us. So
I like
more shoveling.
I like the concept of chilly. Chilly for you is like what, minus 30 or something?
Definitely in the negatives the other morning without the wind chill factor. So here they come. Here's a little burst of attendees signing on to the webinar right now. So that's a good sign. I'll probably give it another 2 minutes if that's all right with you, Rick.
No problems.
Okay. We appreciate folks' patience. So Rick, the content of the webinar is primarily taken from your book, isn't that correct?
Yes, really we're going over a couple of chapters, really chapters 11 and 12, predominantly out of the book. Those are the 2 chapters that really apply specifically to, interviewing franchisees.
Sure. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how important would you say those calls with franchise owners are?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think it's probably the most important part of the entire due diligence. You know, all the parts are important, so it's hard to put them against each other, but if you have to forego any part, you know, this is the part you would not want to forego. Is talking
Okay.
to franchisees.
Great. Well, I think we've given ample time. It looks as though the flow of attendees has gotten to a certain point. So I want to welcome everyone and begin today's webinar, a guide to the franchisee interview. My name is Matt Bogart. I'm the sales manager for Franchise.com, and I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for attending. I'd also want to thank Rick Bizio for presenting today's webinar. Rick is the author of The Educated Franchisee, which can be found at Amazon.com by searching for The Educated Franchisee. And the book is a fantastic resource for people involved in the due diligence process of investigating any franchise company. I also want to offer special thanks to our sponsor, Driven Brands, the franchisor of a number of franchise concepts in the automotive sector, the likes of Meineke, Maaco, Econolube, as well as their mobile service concepts, Aero Colors and AutoQual. You can certainly learn about all these businesses in the automotive section at Franchise.com. And again, we do thank them for their support of educating franchise candidates through their sponsorship. The webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes, give or take. And attendees are muted at this point. You will all receive an email afterwards that will contain links to the audio recording of this webinar, links to our sponsor, Driven Brands, as well as links to Amazon.com if you are interested in purchasing Rick's book, The Educated Franchisee. As I mentioned, attendees' phones are currently muted, so if you do have specific questions, please type them into the space allotted to on the right-hand side of your screen. I will be collecting the questions as well as asking Rick to answer specific questions at the end of the webinar. So at this point in time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Rick Bizio.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Today we're going to be talking about the art of interviewing franchisees, and I guess, you know, even before I start that, I almost have to apologize by the fact that everybody's on mute. I've done a lot of webinars over the years, and I love to have interaction with the audience, but when the audience becomes very, very large, it's very difficult to do that. So I'm going to spend, you know, 30, 35 minutes talking about this subject, and I definitely would invite you to ask your questions, you know, put them in that box, send them over to Matt, and we'll cover as many of those as we can at the very end. So we're going to go through the art of interviewing franchisees. This is just one part of the entire due diligence process, but it's a very important part. It's the part where you'll learn probably more about the realities of what it takes to be successful in the business than probably any other part of your due diligence. So we thought this would be a good thing to really focus in on. The topics today is really, first general topic is going to be general information about calling franchisees, how to do it, how to approach that. The second thing we're going to cover is which franchisees to call and why, and also which questions to ask them. Again, there are a lot of different franchisees out there, and you really do have to have a game plan, and this will hopefully give you a really good game plan to go out and do that. And the last thing we're going to talk about really is discovering the real income as it's associated with the business. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Most of them, quite honestly, don't work very well. What we want to do is give you an approach that's going to allow you to come away from your discussions with franchisees with a very good understanding of what the potential income in the business is and how that income is generated. And as I mentioned to Matt earlier on, really what we're doing is we're covering information as found in chapters 11 and 12 of The Educated Franchisee. And so what we want to do is kind of talk about some of the webinar takeaways. First, I want you to understand really the critical role that franchisees play in the discovery process. There's information you can get from franchisees that you just simply can't get anywhere else. And so you have to really have a game plan and know what you're doing. That will definitely allow you to get more information out of the process. I want you to be comfortable discussing income with franchisees. I know a lot of folks get on the phone and they're just not comfortable with that discussion. You need to be comfortable with it. You need to be able to do what's necessary to get the information that you need during that conversation while keeping the franchisee comfortable sharing that information with you. And after we're done, we're going to follow up with some additional emails, and we're going to be sending you some questions to ask franchisees. It's a kind of a starter list of questions to ask franchisees, along with another document called the 10 Franchise Essentials, talking about franchising in general. So there's just some basic takeaways that you'll be able to get from this particular webinar. First thing we're going to talk about, of course, that we talked about is general information. And I want to start out with a really basic question is, when do you call a franchisee? When do you go out there and start calling? And it should actually say, when do you call a franchisee, as opposed to when do you call a franchise? So when do you call a franchisee? Do you call them at the beginning of the process, the middle of the process, or the end of the process? And I've been in franchising a couple of decades, and I've seen it done all types of different ways. I want to just start out with the basic understanding is that the franchisee calls come in the middle of the process. Okay? At the beginning of the process, you contact the franchisor. You have a discussion with them about what the business is about. They send you some materials, a marketing kit as such. They send you a disclosure document. The franchisor's obligation really is to give you foundational information of how that business works, and to do that prior to releasing you to the franchisees. Okay, the franchisee's job is not to teach you the foundational stuff. The franchisee's job is to help you understand what the business is about at the street level. So that really happens in the middle of the process. Usually, after you've gone through a couple of calls with the franchisor will then allow you to begin calling franchisees. Some companies have passwords that you have to have. There's some kind of a mechanism that they put in place so that when you call a franchisee, the franchisee knows you've gone through the basic information, you are at a point where calling franchisees is appropriate, and they also know that you're not a nosy competitor trying to kind of learn about their business. They know that you're a serious individual looking to learn. And again, at the end of the process, obviously the end of the process is where you go out for Discovery Day, you get a chance to meet with the individual, with the franchisor, and you really want to call franchisees prior to the end of the process. So it all happens in the middle of the process. Another thing I want to talk about is why franchisees talk to you. And again, there's a lot of misunderstandings in regard to why franchisees even pick up the phone and talk with you. So I want to open up a small poll here. You should see on your screen a poll. Why do franchisees talk to you? And as you'll see on there, number one is financial incentives. Number two is that they have a contractual requirement that requires them to do that. And number three is just to pay it forward. In other words, just because they like to be nice. And I'd like everybody on the phone to vote. All right? You see those on your screen. All you have to do is click on the box that you believe is correct, and go out there and let's do a little voting and see where everybody comes in. I'm going to give you all about probably 10 more seconds. We've got almost 3/4 of everybody voted already, so got about 10 more seconds, and then we will close the poll out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to hit close here. And I'll show you what the results were. And interestingly, the majority of people got it right, okay? But for those of you who didn't, let's just talk just for a moment. As far as a financial incentive, does the franchisee receive a financial incentive to talk to you? And the answer is no, all right? If they do, then they are no longer by definition a franchisee. They are now an agent of the franchisor, and they really fall under a whole different set of rules and are very restricted in what they can tell you. So they do not receive financial information. As far as contractual requirement, in 2 decades, I have never seen a contract that requires franchisees to speak with prospective franchisees. Does it exist somewhere? Maybe, but I doubt it. Usually that is not a contractual requirement. The only reason franchisees talk to you is because they want to pay it forward. It's because somebody talked to them, so they want to spend some time and talk to you and be nice, basically. It's just a way of doing that. And so I'm going to hide that. We'll go back to the presentation. And so that's why franchisees talk to you, because they just want to really kind of just be nice. If you want to contact a franchisee, do you call them, do you email them, or do you just let the franchisor connect you? And the answer is all of the above on that one, okay? It's all of the above. I suggest first calling them. If you end up in voicemail, email them. If you don't hear from them in a day or two, call them again and email them again, and if that doesn't work, get the franchisor to connect you. You might have to be a squeaky wheel, okay? but it is something that you definitely have to use various techniques because different franchisees will respond to different approaches. All righty? And the last thing is I want to just say is play nice. And I want to just take a slide and talk a little bit about that. Why is it important to play nice? And you know, a lot of times when people get into a due diligence, they look at it almost as an adversarial type of thing where they want to learn everything they can with the assumption that everyone's trying to hide information from them. And so they become very aggressive with their questioning and challenging with their questioning. And that really doesn't work very well, especially with franchisees. It's very important to play nice. And here's a couple of basic reasons why, okay? First, in regard to the reasons why, if I can get this to go, yeah. Franchisees will tell you more if they like you. That's a pretty simple statement, but if they like you, they'll spend more time with you. They'll tell you more information, so you want them to like you. Second thing is, and a lot of people don't realize this, is that a lot of quality franchise systems ask their franchisees to report back to the franchisor after the conversation. So you're going to ask them a bunch of questions, and then they're going to send an email or call the franchisor and say, hey, I just spoke with that gentleman that you said was going to call me, and I just want to let you know that I think he'd be a really good match to our system. Or the alternative, I spoke with him and didn't really like the guy. I don't think he'd be a good match. If you get a lot of negative feedback, if the franchisees keep calling the franchisor and say, you know, I don't like the attitude of this guy or gal, well, the franchisor is very likely going to not be particularly excited about moving forward and probably not offer a franchise. So they can actually have an impact on your ability to become a franchisee. Obviously, being nice is just the right thing to do, but there's also another reason, and that is that it's the franchise value proposition. If you look at the total franchise value proposition, it's like a four-legged stool, okay? And this value proposition has some various pieces. It has training and support, which we're all very aware of. It has infrastructural support, which is the all of the back-end operating systems and training systems, the CRM systems, all the various things that franchisors do for a long period of time to help franchisees and make that business work better. You know, there's resale value, which is, of course, an important part of the value stool that they probably can do an entire webinar just on that topic. But the fourth part, the fourth leg of that stool is your fellow franchisees. When you speak with franchisees during your due diligence process, keep in mind that if you become a franchisee at some point in the future, these could become your future friends. These are people who will add value to you, who will share their experiences with you long into your franchise relationship. And your ability to speak with other franchisees on a regular basis long term is a very important part of that total value proposition. So start the relationship with your franchisee calls, okay? That's general information about calling franchisees. I'm going to talk a little bit about which franchisees to call and why, all right? And again, this is giving you a game plan, a strategy to allow you to really go out there and figure out who do I call, why do I call them, what questions, and in which order. The first type of franchisee you really want to call is the biggest, the best, or the leader. This is really any franchisee in the system who's doing it right, following the system, is respected as somebody who's a leader within the system. These are the people you want to talk to first. And there's a very simple reason for that. If you call those people who are the leaders and the people who are respected in the system, and you learn a little bit about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and that's not satisfactory to you, well, you can pretty much short-circuit the process right there. Because if they're not achieving or what you want to achieve, or they're not the kind of people that you want to be associated with, then there's really no reason to move forward. You want to know what success looks like, and if you can achieve that success, you know what's it going to mean to you. So that's the first type of person to talk to. Now, when you talk to those individuals, the question is, what kind of questions do you ask them? And the questions you ask them have to do with scale. It has to do with evolution. It has to do with how the franchise has changed, how the market has changed, how much time they spend in their business, how many employees they have. There's all these questions you can ask because they've got a wonderful perspective, right? But there's one type of question that really doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's questions, actually two questions in regard to training and questions in regard to support, okay? The older franchisees went to training a long time ago, and quite frankly, they've probably forgotten what training is about, and even if they remember, it's probably changed. So asking an older, more mature franchisee about training and support is really a waste of a question in many cases, okay? The next kind of franchise, after you've spoken with one or two of these people, the next kind of franchisee is new franchisees. And this is really the opposite. This is where you can't really, a new franchisee is 3 to 6 months out of the gate, all right? That's the toughest time of any business owner, and they're really out there trying to figure out what to do and struggling and working hard at it. So you can't really talk to them about evolution and all that kind of stuff, but what you can absolutely talk to them about is training and support. The training and support they have received is going to be very, very similar to the training and support you will receive. And so those are great questions for new franchisee. What's it like to come out of the gate today? Training, support, getting the business open, all that sort of thing. Very important. New franchisees can help you with those questions. After you've spoken with the biggest, the best, and some of the newer ones, the next kind of franchisee that I always suggest is franchisees similar to you. Now let's just imagine, for the sake of discussion, you could find a franchisee who was identical to you. I'm talking an identical twin, somebody who's had all the same life experiences as you, all the same skill sets, everything else exactly the same. But they had gotten into the franchise a year before you. Well, that would be a great person to talk to because they are probably going to reflect what it is that your experience will be. Well, if you can find a franchisee in the system who's similar to you, as similar as possible, that franchisee is going to add really good value to your due diligence. They're going to see the world the same way you do. When you ask them questions, they're going to really give you a lot of very insightful information. So finding franchisees who are similar to you is an important part of the process also. So now you've got 3 different types of franchisees. You've made 1 or 2 calls to each one of these. The next kind of franchisee you might want to call is what I call poor performers. These are the ones who are not doing well, okay? It's perfectly acceptable to ask the franchisor to introduce you to a couple of people who are struggling, all right? You don't want to talk to these people first. If you talk to the strugglers first, you'll have no idea why they're struggling. You won't know the information you need. You won't know what the training is about. You don't know what the support is about. You don't know what the operation is about. So you don't know what it means to be successful. Therefore, when you talk to a poor performer, you won't know how to interpret it, okay? But once you've spoken with these people, talk to a couple of people that are more on the bottom end. Every franchise system, despite what they may tell you, they've got superstars at the top, they've got a bunch of basic performers in the middle, and they got some people on the bottom that aren't doing all that great. Talk to them and try to figure out why they're not performing well. Try to figure out what's not working for that individual and why they're not getting where they need to go. And then look at yourself in the mirror and say, do I have that same risk profile? That's an important thing to think about. If you have the same risk profile, then you have to look and say, well, you know, should I get into this business, or what can I do to manage that risk profile? And you can learn a lot about what not to do sometimes just simply by calling a couple of poor performers. So far, the first 4 categories are going to require you ask the franchisor for some guidance. They're going to have to ask you, hey, tell me, you know, who your biggest are, who your new franchisees are, who are similar to me. You're going to ask for some guidance. You don't want the franchisor to guide you through the entire process. You also want to make a few random calls. The random calls have to come more towards the end of the process because you have to have enough information to be able to handle a random call, all right? Now, just so that you know, and there's a thing called an FDD, a franchise disclosure document. Again, probably a subject of a different discussion, but a franchise disclosure document has a lot of information, including the name, address, and phone number of every franchisee in the system. So random calls just basically means go out and find some of these people and give them a call. Now, when you make a random call, the first thing you do, you get on the phone with them, and keep in mind that fewer random calls are going to actually connect, okay? If the franchisor sends you to somebody, it's because the franchisor knows that they're more likely to answer the phone. They have a track record of answering questions for people. Well, if you do random calls, you're going to run into more people that just don't feel like it's their obligation to talk to you. But if you pick up the phone, they answer and say, we have a moment to speak. They say yes. Well, the first question you need to ask them is a very simple question. It's, how long have you been in business? Now, if the person's been in business 3 months, that's one set of questions. If they've been in business 5 years, that's a totally different set of questions. So you need to know how long they've been in business, first of all. The second thing you need to know is how they are performing. So just simply ask them, you know, would you consider yourself to be in like the top third or the bottom third or kind of somewhere in the middle? How they're performing, again, will affect the questions that you choose to ask them. So doing random calls more towards the end of the process is an important thing to do. Now, there is one type of franchisee that you do have to be careful of, all right? And I'm going to go out there, and this is my second poll for you here. Let me see if I can get that thing. You need to be careful of which type of franchise. Okay. So you got a second poll up in front of you there. You need to be careful of which type of franchise. Alternative 1 is a local or neighboring franchisee. Alternative 2 is franchisees that have left the system. Alternative 3 is the #1 franchisee in the system. And number 4 is unhappy franchisees. Which one is the one that you most have to be careful of? Got about 50%, actually even more than that now. Okay, I'm going to give it about 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2. This is your last chance if you haven't voted. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it, and I will show you the answers. All right. And again, kind of kudos to you. The majority of people actually got this right, okay? And that is that it's your local or neighboring franchisees, okay? The unhappy franchisees, you know, again, those are people who might not be performing well. It's not necessarily bad to talk to them. You just have to kind of put it in context. But in regard to the local or neighboring franchisees, that's the one to be most careful of. Here's the reality, is that the reason we talk to franchisees is because we want unbiased information, right? We could talk to the franchisor and ask them all the questions. They could give us the answer, and we could move on with that. But we talk to franchisees because we want unbiased information. Now, if you talk to the franchisee down the road and say, hey, I'm looking at opening up a franchise here down the road from you, there is a chance that they will be biased. They may feel that by you opening that business, that you will be affecting their business in a positive way or a negative way. But there is the potential that they could feel that way. And therefore, there's the potential that they could be biased. But there's also a second reason, and that is when the local franchisee finds out you're looking at that territory, occasionally what happens is that they will go out and actually buy the territory. Once they know the territory is in play, they may call the franchisor and say, hey, you know that territory down the road? I'd like to buy it. And it's a defensive move from their point of view. That way they don't have a competitor. They buy the territory and they block out any competitors. I've been working with folks for years, and every year, 2 to 3 people that I work with lose an opportunity because the local franchisee learns about the fact the territory is in play, reaches out, and buys the territory. So be very careful with that. And even if you call a franchisee on the other part of the United States and they say, where are you located? Don't be specific. Say, you know, I live in Georgia. Well, we're in Georgia. Well, I live in the Atlanta area, but I'm considering relocating. I'm not really sure at this point. Be a little bit vague, because their best friend could be the person down the road, and as soon as you hang up, they call their best friend down the road and say, hey, did you know that territory is in play? Just be a little bit evasive, a little bit careful. So those are the ones, the franchisees down the road are the ones you need to be most careful of. You can hide on that so you get back to the regular screen. Okay. Very good. So that's what we need to talk about, which franchisees to call in which order. I want to go to the third topic we want to talk about today, which is building a P&L. Now, some of you on the phone probably have a lot of experience with P&Ls and with balance sheets, and you may even have an accounting background. And there'll be other people on the phone right now who have no experience with it. They don't even know what P&L means. So first thing I'm going to do is tell you what P&L means. It's a profit and loss statement. Profit and loss statement, that's what that's called. Now, again, for somebody who doesn't have a financial experience, that can be intimidating. All right, P&L, profit and loss statement. What is that, and how do I do that? Well, think of it this way. Income minus expenses. That's what a profit and loss statement. At the top of a profit and loss statement is your income, and then after that is your expenses. And what's left is that's your profit, right, or your loss. All right, that's why they call it a profit and loss statement. If you are running a household, you have the same thing. You have income, which could be salaried income, right? And then you have your expenses, which could be your cable and your automotive and your groceries, right? And at the end, you either have a positive or a negative. That's all a profit and loss statement is. So let's not get intimidated by the word or anything like that. Income minus expense, that's all a profit and loss statement is. In the FDD, the franchise disclosure document that we mentioned earlier, there's a thing called an Item 19. And an Item 19 is a financial performance representation. That's what Item 19 means, financial performance representation. Now, this is information which can lead you to see, you know, how much money you can make in a business. All right. About 30% of franchisors provide information in an Item 19. Franchisors are not required to give you this information. They have the option. They can give it to you if they want to, but they don't have to. 30% of franchisors provide some information in an Item 19. The rest of them do not. And we can get into the discussion of why, but I think more than anything, you just need to understand that even those that provide information, None of them provide enough information to build a full P&L. None of them provide you with all of your income, all your expenses, and all the information you need as it would apply to your marketplace. Okay? So regardless of whether there's an item 19 or not, you have to get your information somewhere else. And the way you get that information is by talking to franchisees. That's where that information will come from. The item 19 might provide you a good starting point, but at the end of the day, the information has to come from the franchisees. So what happens when people start talking to franchisees? They call up a franchisee and they generally will ask them some softball questions. Are you happy? The franchisor treats you well, all that kind of stuff. These softball questions. And about a few minutes into it, they say, I got to ask you some questions, some financial questions. Is that okay? Franchisee is going to say, sure, that's fine. And then they're going to ask him a question like this. Are you making money? Or they're going to ask him, maybe a question is your business profitable? Or how long before you found break even? I've heard people ask questions like this. What is your ROI? Or, even more impressive, what is your EBITDA? Earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Wow, that's a great question, right? Other people say, what is your salary? I've had other people say, what is your income? Okay? These are what we call bottom line questions, and there is a reality is that there's something fundamentally wrong with all of these bottom line questions, okay? As a matter of fact, what I will tell you is that by asking these questions and getting answers to these questions, it's almost worse than no information at all. Because when you have no information, you know that you're ignorant. But when you ask these questions and they give you answers, now you think you have knowledge, but really you don't, all right? The fact is these questions, first of all, are very personal. And obviously there's that thing that's very obvious. But the fact is these questions, if I was, they give you no information on income. They give you no information on expenses. They completely negate the entire income and expense thing. They basically are trying to pull stuff off the bottom. It doesn't talk about the tax effect. And it doesn't reflect the fact that most business owners legally attempt to reduce their profits so they can reduce their taxes. Okay? And I'll give you an example of how this works, because for a lot of people that don't get this, okay? If you asked me a question, you said, hey, Rick, you've been in business for quite a while here. How long did it take before you could pay yourself a salary, and what is your salary today? And I said to you, well, I didn't pay myself a salary for 2 years, and today my salary is only $40,000 a year. Now, if I told you that, for most of you on the phone, you would say, well, gee whiz, that doesn't sound very impressive. On the other hand, you could ask me, what did you pay yourself in your salary for year one? I could say to you, well, I paid myself $200,000 salary my first year. And for most people, they'd say, well, gosh, that sounds like a good business. But here's the reality is that as a business owner, I don't want to pay myself a salary. It's not a good way to take money, okay? The fact is that if I paid myself no salary in the first 2 years, I might have paid myself money in a whole variety of other ways, okay? At the same time, if I paid myself a $200,000 salary, people say, well, gosh, if you paid yourself $200,000, it must have been a good business. Well, I don't know if anybody remembers the dot-coms about a decade ago. We had a whole bunch of businesses that were built. They all had employees. All the employees got paid salaries. And a lot of the dot-coms never made any money. Okay? So you don't necessarily have to be making money in order to pay salaries. You can simply overfund and then pay salaries out. Okay? So these bottom line questions really do not help you learn what you need to know. All right? So I'm going to give you a different approach, a different tactic that will hopefully allow you to come away with really good information without these types of questions. By the way, most franchisees have no idea what EBITDA means. Return on investment as a business owner, why do I even care about that? These kind of questions aren't really useful. And even if you ask them, I may not even know the answer as the potential franchisee trying to answer the question. All right? So what we're going to talk about is what I call a top-down approach. A top-down approach. What this means is we start at the top of the P&L, and we work our way down instead of asking questions that fall off the bottom of the P&L, all right? And I'm going to give you a step-by-step approach. Step one, first thing you're going to do is you're going to list the types of income and expenses. You're going to guess. This is even before you get on the phone with the franchisee. You're going to guess. You're going to say, okay, on the top we've got sales, and then my expenses. I'm going to have labor expense. I'm going to have marketing expense. I'm going to have materials. I'm going to have some automotive, some marketing, some insurance. Okay, you could probably guess 75% of the expense categories right off the top of your head because they're just logical, right? You're going to guess. So that's your first step. Then you've got this tentative list in front of you. Step two, you're on the phone with the franchisee and you say, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about income and expenses and that sort of thing. Could you talk to me about that? The franchisee is going to say, sure, what are your questions? First question you ask the franchisee is, do I have all of the categories? You're going to say, listen, I know the income on the top, I believe that's income of sales. Now, what are your expenses? I think we have labor costs, right? And we have this. Go through your expenses and see if you've missed any. The franchisee may not know what their EBITDA is, but they know what their expenses are for a very good reason, and that is that they pay the bills. They pay the bills, they know what the expense categories are. So they can say to you, yeah, that's a good list, but you need to add this one and this one. All right? Now, once you've got that list and you've got a more comprehensive list, step three, you're still on the phone with the franchisee, ask about each income and expense category. Ask the franchisee how it works. Ask the franchisee, say, hey, this labor cost thing, how does that work? I mean, how do you calculate that? Now, one franchisee may say, well, labor cost is going to be $2,000 a month. It's always the same. There might be in a different system, the franchisee may say, well, labor cost is 40%, at which point you'll say, good. 40% of what? They say, well, 40% of gross sales. Say, oh, okay, so if I do $1,000, then it's $400 of labor cost. Is that correct? Franchisees can say yes. You're going to say, great, now you understand how labor works. Let's talk about marketing. Let's talk about insurance. Go through each one and just understand how they work, all right? Once you know how they work, you're going to have a good understanding of how that P&L works. Then you repeat this process with other franchisees. You talk to a second and a third and a fourth franchisee, and you keep asking these same questions because each franchisee is going to have slightly different numbers. It's going to give you a little variance that you can work with and understand what not just what the average is, but what the range is. And then once you've got all of this information together and you know what the gross sales are, because you're going to ask them, say, what are your gross sales? What do you expect your gross sales to be this year? Okay, it's $500,000. And then you know all your expenses, you know how they work. You can build a bit of a P&L or an income and expense sheet there. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take that income and expense sheet and you're going to send it to a couple of franchisees. Because when you finish talking to a franchisee, you're going to say, hey, listen, after I build this P&L, would you mind if I sent it over to you? You could just take a quick look and let me know if I'm on the right path. And the franchisee will probably say yes. So after you've got it put together, a week later or whatever it is, send it over to them in an email and say, could you take a quick look at this and make sure I'm on the right path? By taking these steps, what's going to happen is you're going to understand how the P&L works. You're going to be able to really understand the numbers in a far more comprehensive way. There's some specific benefits to this top-down approach, and I want to go through those benefits with you so you understand why this is such a more effective way of doing it. First of all, you're getting multiple sources of information. Okay, you're talking to multiple franchisees. So nobody can guide you one way or the other way because you'll have enough sources that you have averages. You're going to be able to compare and contrast, not just average the results, but compare different approaches. Some person may start with an employee right out of the gate. Somebody else may start without an employee. Well, how does that compare with these numbers? How do the numbers change when you make that kind of a business decision? It automatically eliminates the tax effect, all right? Automatically, the franchisee is never going to say to you, well, you have to include at least $5,000 a year of daycare expenses. They're never going to say you've got to buy a Humvee for your oldest son. They're not going to say these things because they know those are not real business expenses. So automatically, the tax effect is going to be moved to the side, and you're going to be able to focus on the actual real business. You're going to be able to determine the total owner benefit for any business. Owner benefit is the total amount of money that an owner is able to pull out of the business regardless of where, when, and how they pull it out. Whether they pull it out through pass-through expenses, whether they pull it out through a distribution or a dividend, whether they take it into retirement programs, whether they take it out as a salary, regardless of where they take it out, this approach will allow you to separate out owner benefits from actual real business expenses. And you will know what it takes to break even because all you have to do is put different numbers in at the top, and eventually you'll be able to figure out what the volume you need to break even. And you'll be able to customize your P&L, your profit and loss statement, right? You'll be able to customize it based on what your personal business plan is. And more than anything else, it should give you the confidence that you know the numbers, all right? That you're confident that you know what you're talking about, you know what it's going to take to be successful, you know what volume you have to hit the various thresholds, and it should give you a certain level of confidence. So that's, talking about this top-down approach. There's some really significant benefits, and really nobody can mislead you when you use this approach because you're really cross-referencing a lot of this information as you go. So that's the third thing. It's building a P&L. Basic approach to do that will help you go through that. I'm going to recap real quick. General information we talked about. Motivations. We've talked about how and when to call, and when to call the franchisees, which franchisees to call, why it's important to play nice. We talked about that. We talked about which franchisees to call and why. We talked about which order. We talked about what questions to ask them. We talked about who we might want to think about avoiding. And we talked about how we discover the real numbers, how to avoid bottom line questions, which will do nothing but mislead you, how to focus on more of a top-down approach, which will give you the information that you need. And again, as I mentioned, really we're talking about chapters 11 to 12 out of the book. That's kind of a summary of a lot of the information that you'll find in those two chapters. And that's the three topics. That's what we talked about. This is me. That's my contact information. And what I'm going to do at this point is hand it back to Matt. And I know, Matt, you probably, if there's questions, you've been keeping track of that. If there's no questions, then we'll probably all go on our way. But I'm going to take it to the last slide here and hand it back over to Matt.
Well, Rick, I absolutely appreciate the time that you've spent, and it is clear your knowledge is broad and deep, and Franchise.com absolutely thanks you for spending the time that you have. And as I suspected, the content was very, very comprehensive and very, very straightforward. You know what, I did try and pose a question to the audience to see if anybody did have specific questions, and I have not received any of them so far. Obviously we want to extend our special thanks to Rick for sharing his knowledge and providing some insight into some of the best practices for interviewing franchisees. Again, I'd also like to once again thank our, yes,
yeah,
Rick?
I was just looking here. It does appear that there's one question. Do you want me to cover that, or are we out of time?
No, we're not out of town. It looks as though I would actually ask you to read the question and answer it at this stage. Now that you're not doing the presentation and not being distracted,
yeah.
Folks can feel free to ask the questions, and Rick will answer them.
Okay. Well, the question says, how many franchisees should we talk to in total, and does it change for a big versus a small franchise system? And that's a really good question, and I appreciate, I guess it's Gus that asked that. What I will tell you is that it's a little bit up to you. I think you need to speak with at least 6 or 7 franchisees. Usually 8 is about the average that most people get to. First of all, whether it's big or small, it doesn't really matter. I think that information is information, and you're going to need to speak with enough franchisees that you feel like you really understand the information that has been given to you. Here's how you can tell if you've spoken with enough. Okay? You've spoken, let's say, 8 or 9 franchisees, and you pick up the phone and you talk to the 10th franchisee, and everything you hear, you've already heard once. In other words, you're not gaining any more information. It becomes more of a redundant exercise proving what you already know. And when that happens, you've talked to enough franchisees. But so long as you're learning more information during each call, and you're getting significant return on that investment of time, then you should keep calling franchisees. Like I said, I think that the average probably is around 7, 8, something in that neighborhood. I've worked with individuals that have done 25 calls. Very unusual to do that. But I have talked with some people that have done that. There's other people that have spoken with 3 or 4 franchisees and felt that's enough. But the average person's somewhere around 8. And once you feel like you're getting the same information over and over again, then you probably should move on to the next step in the due diligence process. So that was Gus's question. I'm sorry about butting in there, Matt, but
No,
there.
Absolutely, butt in at all. Are there any other questions that folks would like to type into the screen? For those that are looking for that section, it should be a window on the side, right-hand side of your screen, and you should be able to type questions in there. We do have a couple of additional moments here for those that would be interested. Looks like you got another question in there, Rick.
Yeah, it says both of them are daycares. Let's see here. We are looking into 2 different franchises. One has more years of operation than the other, and the other seems to have more information regarding franchisee information, regarding franchisee information. Both of them are daycares. You know, interestingly, the information that franchisors share is fairly regulated. I mean, it's in the disclosure document, a lot of that information. And so the franchise disclosure document should be able to give you a lot of information in a very predictable way. There are some franchisors that might be more willing to give information than others. But I'm not sure. I think that most of the information should be fairly standardized in the way that it's delivered. As far as, you know, one having more years of operation than the other one, you know, again, that's a matter of personal preference, just as long as it has some people you can talk to and really validate that the system works. So long as you have some franchisees in there. The longer the track record, obviously, the more people you can talk to and the more perspective you can get. But, you know, younger franchises can have their benefit as well in some situations, just so long as they have enough track record to be able to effectively measure. So that is that. Okay. You want to close her up, Matt?
Sure. Unless there's any other questions, it doesn't appear that that's the oh, here's one other one. Should I go visit a franchisee's operation if invited? And should the question feature needs some more space and characters? So I guess should you go visit?
Yeah. I mean, if you're invited to go visit a franchisee's operation, I would definitely suggest that you try to do that. However, also keep in mind that the franchisor may have some rules. There's some franchisors that invite you to go see their locations, and there's other franchisors that really don't support that. Okay, so you know, part of being in the franchise system is understanding how things are done, and so I would definitely ask the franchisor, say, hey, listen, I've been invited. I'd like to go see them. You know, I'm assuming you wouldn't have any issues with that. And the other thing, so that you know, is that, you know, later on in the process, you'll probably go to a discovery day. And that discovery day, a lot of times during discovery day, you will probably go visit a couple of locations while you're at discovery day with the franchisor as well. So it's all good stuff. Anytime you can get more information is good. Just make sure you do it within the rules and the expectations that the franchise system in general has put in place.
Excellent question. Excellent question. How do I obtain franchisees' contact information? Should I just call the business place and ask to speak with them?
It's in item, what is that, Matt? Is that item 21?
I believe it's either item 20 or item 21 in the FDD.
Yeah, I think it's in the FDD. The franchise disclosure document will be the name, address, and phone number of every franchisee in the system. Now, the way you get an FDD, of course, is by approaching the franchisor, you know, proving yourself to be a viable candidate, somebody who has the capability and the interest and that sort of thing, and then they will give you the FDD, and then you'll have the name, address, and phone number of all of the franchisees in the entire system. So that's how you obtain it.
And typically, in order for a franchisor to provide that FDD with you, you will need to complete a more substantial request for consideration, or dare say we, an application to determine the criteria that you match with a franchisor?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You know, the way that the law reads is that the franchisor must give you the FDD upon reasonable request. Reasonable request has not yet been defined in the court. However, it's generally interpreted to mean that the individual, the prospect, has to present themselves to the franchisor, show that they have not only interest but capability, and be in a discussion with the franchisor, and you know, so that the franchisor knows that they're serious, and you know, and a lot of that has to do with filling out an application, and then speaking with the franchisor, and making the franchisor realizes you're a serious candidate, you have the capability and the interest. At that point, generally speaking, it's considered reasonable to receive the FDD. Most good franchisors will send it to you automatically at that point. There are some franchisors that may not. If they don't send it to you, request it, because they must give you that document at least 2 weeks prior to signing any agreements. So it's not something they can avoid giving you. They must give you the FDD, and that's really where you're going to get a lot of the information about where, you know, which franchisees, what their phone numbers are, all that kind of stuff.
Rick, can you back the slide up? Because I think if folks have some of your contact details, it might be helpful. This slide does not necessarily have them, so that's there for everyone else. We do have a couple of other questions, and I think we'll just take a few more here and wrap this up. At the time of choosing which child care franchise, should we look more into the quality of the programs that they have, or look into other things?
Well, that's a really good question. You have to start out with the basic premise of why look at a franchise at all? What is a franchise supposed to do, right? The franchise is about risk reduction, right? It's about being able to reduce your risk. And then you have to look at it and say, okay, well, when I buy a franchise, what do I buy? And legally what you're buying is the rights to use the system. And that's in the first page of any franchise agreement. Will say the rights to use the system. So really what you're trying to figure out in kind of a holistic way is you're trying to figure out, does this system that I'm purchasing predictably reduce my business risk? And if the answer is yes, then it has value. And if the answer is no, then it doesn't have value. So as far as what do you need to learn, you need to learn everything that's associated with that system. And the most important question you're trying to answer is, if I follow this system, will it lead me more predictably? Does it give me an increased chance of success? And the easiest way to figure that out is by talking to existing franchisees and saying, of those franchisees that followed the system, what was the result? Okay? So I know that's kind of a very high level, but that's fundamentally what you're trying to accomplish. So if the questions you're asking lead you towards that goal of figuring out, does this operating system predictably reduce risk and create success? If the questions you're asking leads towards that, then you're moving in the right direction. If it's information that does not lead you toward it, then it's probably not as relevant. And you know something, Matt? Did I answer the question?
I believe you did. Sure. I believe you did. And if not, they've got your contact details here. We do have, oh, yes, you did, as a matter of fact. So two other quick questions for you, Rick. One from Paul Carragher. If a franchisor has any existing litigation against them, where would that be found?
In the FDD under Item 3.
Item 3 in the FDD will disclose any litigation.
Yeah, what will be disclosed there is any existing litigation with existing franchisees or with third parties that in one way or the other would affect the value of the opportunity. In other words, a third party who's suing based on the fact that the trademark is not owned by the franchisor or something. All of that would be disclosed as well. My understanding is that any, and I believe that any litigation that the franchisor has lost over the last 10 years must also be listed as well. I believe that is the case, but I know that any litigation that is currently undergoing must be in Item 3 in the FDD.
Okay, perfect. We've got time for, unless anybody else has any other further questions, we do have one final one here, it appears, and then we'll wrap it up. Debbie's asking, should testimonials be relied upon?
It depends where you're getting them from, I guess. If it's on a promotional sheet from the franchisor, well, you know, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the franchisor is not going to put a bunch of bad testimonials and send it to you, right? I mean, that's, and I'm not making a derogatory comment about a franchisor. That's just the way things work, right? So I think that the best testimonial you can receive is by talking to a franchisee, interviewing them, and they say, I'm really happy and I do this again. And doing that with them, you know, actually on the phone, digging in and learning about it. But as far as a written list of testimonials, I'm not really sure if there's a giant amount of value in that. And, you know, unless they're unsolicited testimonials, like on a third-party website where people have to individually go and do that sort of thing, maybe there'd be some value there. I'm not sure.
Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, it doesn't appear as though we have any further questions. Well, we do have one more. Do you have some time, Rick?
I do. I can take one more, then I got to go.
Understood. Do you have a list of the categories they would need of things to take into consideration for the business plan, like marketing, labor, et cetera? I think you may have addressed that by trying to come up with that list of areas to be cognizant of on the expense side.
Yeah, I don't actually have a list in regard to the business plan because each business plan would be, you know, really broken down a lot by the what it is that the franchise. You know, each franchise is different in regard to what it needs. Each business is different. Each industry is different. So the business plan itself would not. I wouldn't have a one business plan that would necessarily fit everybody. But it is interesting. If you go onto Google and you put in template business plans or something like that into Google, my guess is you could run into a whole bunch of template business plans that you could use. I know that SCORE, through the U.S. Department of Commerce, has template business plans on their website. And as far as actually the P&L, what I was really listing there was a list of expense categories. And I don't have a comprehensive list of categories for every different business because, again, every business would be different. But what I will tell you is that 75% of the expenses are the same for every business. There's labor, there's material, there's marketing, there's insurance, there's going to be a royalty, there might be some vehicle costs, there's going to be telecommunications, there's going to be air conditioning, there's going to be utilities. I mean, it's going to be the same for most franchises, and you can just simply start with that and let the franchisees help you from there.
That's brilliant. Well, Rick, again, I know your time is valuable, and Franchise.com absolutely thanks you for spending this hour with us. I do thank all of the attendees for being here. Again, you'll be receiving emails from us with links to the audio version of this webinar to be referred back to, links to our sponsor, Driven Brands, links to where you can purchase Rick's book if you haven't been able to write it down from this screen as of now. And again, we do wish everyone the best of success in finding the right franchise. And at that, we will conclude today's webinar. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Best of success. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.